Do you want to sit here, Lily? Would you rather be here? We can ask someone. Would you like to swap? We got it. Come. Come. It's done. She's left it. Come. Over the last few weeks, we completed a detailed study of the chapter titled Man and the Evolution from Sri Aurobindo's Life Divine, where Sri Aurobindo took up the whole question of the evolutionary process and the emergence of the human mind, beginning with all the objections which have been placed against such a possible evolution, showing how in fact there are only specialized forms of animals, that there is no obvious trend of an evolution other than in our imagination. We do not see evidence of one animal developing to become another animal. And yet, all these different types represent distinct layers, distinct grades of consciousness. And so, there was a detailed discussion of whether at all there is a possibility of a change from one animal type into another. And we saw, yes, that there is a process, and he dwelt upon the process. And while modern science assumes that there is such a process, it has not yet found evidence. And this understanding of why is found in Sri Aurobindo's explanation that in fact nature wants to create special types, and the transition from one type to another is a very rapid passage. Recently, there is evidence to show that a particular type of flightless bird which grew or developed in one of the Pacific islands not only evolved or rather devolved once, but at least 3 times. The fossil evidence shows that the bird devolved on the island because it didn't need to fly, it had no predators, it lost its ability to fly and then became extinct. And again, a whole new stream of such devolution took place, and again it became extinct, and at least 3 times this process has happened. What we notice is that each time this process happened, the end result was exactly the same bird. It's almost as if in nature's intention, here is a particular type of creature that she wants to express out of herself. She finds a way from the nearest existing form to pull that, form it, and then cuts the link. Because the link has no meaning, it is this form that she wants. And so Sri Aurobindo explores all these things, and you can see in his logic and even in the depth of understanding, he's well ahead of current science. But separately from these, he also explores the evolution of consciousness of the soul as it migrates through forms. And in the last portion of the chapter, he discussed also evolution within the human realm, within the human consciousness, and even human types through which the soul emerges, concluding that out of this, the new spiritual type has to emerge. And briefly, the sense of how that could be. So this chapter was titled Man and the Evolution. And the very next one, which we will begin today, picks up where that left off, and it is titled The Evolution of the Spiritual Man, where he will explore how exactly, first, what is the type of the spiritual man that has to emerge out of the mental human? And second, what are the processes and the means by which this emergence can take place? So the first part of it will be dedicated to understanding what exactly we mean by the spiritual being. Is it merely a high point of some specialized mental capacity, which would be the logical thing to say at first? Because it seems as if out of this huge, humongous mass of matter, a little bit emerges to become life, which is totally dependent on matter. Then out of that life, a little bit emerges that is thinking life, which is totally dependent on the life instincts. And therefore we would conclude that just a tiny bit from that living forms in the universe, a tiny bit will emerge to become a spiritual consciousness, but totally dependent upon the mental. Such would be our first obvious speculation. Sri Aurobindo will show you logically that this is not the case. In fact, as these layers emerge, each turns back upon its source and begins to assert itself. And especially with mind, the degree to which this assertion has taken place, we have literally even destroyed all the life forms on earth, or at least changed them so much that most of their instincts have become confused. But such an intervention is possible, even more is possible through genetic interventions, what we are doing with plant crops. We are driving some of them extinct, but we are creating new ones. If this is the power of mind over life, spirit emerging will be a far greater power than even mind. And so what he will lead us to recognize is that the emergence of spirit will in fact define a whole new type, which will be not a specialized form of mentality, but a type that will transform mentality and life, and perhaps eventually even its material base. And this is how he will lead us to a deeper understanding of what is going to be this spiritual being. So that's why the title, The Evolution of the Spiritual Man. But that's not enough. We also need to understand what is the mechanism, what is the process by which this emergence has to take place, because we are now conscious participants in the evolution. And so the question we want to ask is, I don't want to stay a few million years more for that spiritual emergence. The urgency is now. My inner being is not willing to wait a million years. It wants to experience and transition into this new level of consciousness, in this new way of being here now, not even in this lifetime, but in the next few years. What can I do to begin this process and accelerate it? So this will be the second aspect of the discussion in this chapter. But you will notice at the beginning of every chapter in the Life Divine, Sri Aurobindo gives you specific quotations from the traditions. In this new chapter that we will begin, he has from the Bhagavad Gita, from the Rig Veda, Mundaka Upanishad, and very, very concentrated statements which as if encapsulate all that he discusses. Almost as if he is drawing from the past the seed ideas or insights which now he takes to unfold and develop into their full blooming tree of knowledge. And so we could start by reading those, but we would likely not understand the full import of it. The way to do it is to read the whole chapter and then turn back upon those statements, and there you get the insight, this is what it is. because those statements from the Upanishads or the Veda are extremely cryptic and condensed. So rather than proceeding with the new chapter, I want to turn to the statements, the quotations Sri Aurobindo took from the chapter that we just completed, which was Man and the Evolution. So now that we have completed that chapter, we turn back to look at what those quotations are, and briefly we will dwell upon what they contain, and you will see the insight on the basis of these so many weeks of study, how all that is really held in a concentrated form. The first quotation is from the Shvetashvatara Upanishad, Sri Aurobindo's translation. The one Godhead, secret in all beings, all pervading, the inner self of all, presiding over all action, witness, conscious knower, and absolute. The one in control over the many who are passive to nature, fashions one seed in many ways. Now, looking back at all that we discussed of evolution and the process of evolution through plant, animal, and human, you see what this captures. He's describing one Godhead. He is all-pervading in everything. In all forms and beings, it is the inner self. But in each being, it is secret. You do not see it. But from its secrecy, it presides over all action. It is witness. You could say it is passive. But it is also conscious knower. And it presides over the action, meaning it's not just a passive witness, it also has a subtle influence. And that subtle influence increasingly becomes more and more overt until the one in control over the many, who are passive to nature. So the many, the forms of these creatures, animals, plants, birds, human beings, are passive to nature because it looks as if we are all formed out of nature's instincts and automatism. But the one seated inside has the real control. And it is from within that he exercises that control and fashions one seed in many ways. Now you can see this on two levels. The one seed is the one soul. There is no other. But that one soul in each being formulates the being, forms itself, organizes life in so many different ways. Not only for making many different species, but also within each species, every uniqueness of every being. You could see it this way. You could also see it in a different way. The seed here could represent only the species. Within a species, it is in many variations that it makes. But the suggestion is that the Upanishad wants you to recognize on all levels the truth of this statement. The next statement also from the same Upanishad, Shvetashvatara. The Godhead moves in this field, modifying each web of things separately, in many ways. One, he presides over all wombs and natures. Himself the womb of all, he is that which brings to ripeness the nature of the being and gives to all who have to be matured their result of development and appoints all qualities to their workings. So again, the emphasis is on the secret Godhead within who's working. But he moves in this field, in this domain of material existence, matter, modifying each web of things separately in many ways. Very suggestive. What is this web of things? Notice that every single thing is not only interconnected with everything else, but interdependent with everything else. You can pick up a pebble. The pebble could be formed because of the stream of water which made it, worked upon it. The pebble being there becomes the base for so many other things. It's not so obvious in an object which is passive like a stone. But now take a life form in a complex forest, in an ecosystem. You take out that one life form and typically entire ecosystem will be affected, and sometimes even a system will collapse. When, for example, it is a very interesting example which I saw recently, a certain species of fox or wolf in a part of the United States had become extinct, and they reintroduced it in the wild. The first thing it did, it began to eat the deer. So the deer population went down. As a result of the deer population going down, the grass began to grow longer. New plants emerged which were being eaten by the deer too rapidly. Because those plants grew, the birds began to come back, and they brought with them new seeds and planted many more trees. And it's as if an entire ecosystem rebuilt itself. All it needed was this one wolf to be reintroduced, which had become extinct. This kind of complex interdependence becomes even more complex in the human life. And literally we use the same word web in this vocabulary of the internet, World Wide Web. And literally through the internet we are connected to everybody else in some way, and even interdependent with everybody else. And the level and complexity of this interdependence is now even more overt. So in each web of things, because everything is web of things, this Godhead moves in many ways. He presides over all wombs and natures. Although He is the same one, each womb and each nature of every species and types, it is the same one who presides. And presiding means it also guides the development of creatures in their wombs. And at the same time, Himself the womb of all. Where did these wombs or these creatures emerge? Where did nature itself emerge? Where did the universe itself emerge? He is the womb of all. Which brings to ripeness the nature of the being, and He gives to all who have to be matured their result of developments, appoints the qualities. So the whole discussion now shifts to a higher level. Rather than seeing womb and birth as a process within nature and within a species, the nature and the species themselves are as if formed out of His creative womb. And He chooses what are the species, what are their qualities, what are their tendencies, and their complex interdependencies. In the instinctive relationships of that complex ecosystem, each plant, each animal has a perfect relation with everything else. Who chose that? Who gave it that? Who made sure that this interdependence is so subtly balanced? He, as the original womb, forms out of Himself this particular balance, appoints all qualities, and the matured result of their development. All this comes from that source. So again, you look back at the chapter where repeatedly the theme was this secret power within, which works through evolution and how it acts in so many ways. The next quotation is from the Katha Upanishad. Simply one statement: He fashions one form of things in many ways. And this is the theme of evolution. It picks one type. Sri Aurobindo uses the word real idea to describe it. One species type as if conceived by the divine creator. And then out of that makes a million variation. No one form of that species is similar to any other. Each is unique, and yet they are all similar in the type of the species. And then the next is from the Rig Veda. And this goes much deeper than the others. Who has perceived this occult truth? That the child gives being to the mothers by the workings of his nature? An offspring from the lap of many waters, he comes forth from them, a seer possessed of his whole law of nature. Manifested, he grows in the lap of their crookednesses and becomes high, beautiful, and glorious. So it sounds very cryptic until you recognize the few hints. the seer possessed of his whole law of nature. And straight away we recognize who's being spoken about in the Veda. This is Agni, who is Jata Vedas, who has the knowledge from his birth. And what is Agni here? The divine will which is secret in things. Acting, of course, universally in all things, in every atom, in every molecule, in every cell, in every creature, in every being, but also organizing in every form an individualized focus of consciousness as the evolving soul. And so, the question is asked in the Veda, who has perceived this occult truth that the child, this is Agni, as an individualized being evolving? Child gives being to the mothers by the workings of his nature. The mothers, who are the powers which form this whole universe, which give the material for Agni to organize himself. And it is Agni who gives form to the mothers here. And an offspring from the lap of many waters. The waters here are many streams of consciousness which all coalesce to form our individual being. And it comes out from this a seer possessed of his whole law of nature. He knows where he wants to go. He knows his sense of purpose of life and draws out his uniqueness as the law of his nature, his swadharma, imprints it into the form of the creature, leads from within. And as he is more and more manifested, he grows in the lap of their crookednesses. It's as if everything in this world is somehow crooked, warped, disconnected from its innate truth. And through those crookednesses, somehow Agni finds his way. The soul, the psychic being, finds its way to its rightness and becomes high and beautiful and glorious. And the last quotation is from the Brihad Aranyaka Upanishad, which is, from the non-being to true being, from the darkness to the light, from death to immortality. And obviously this is the description of the journey of the soul across lives. It's always growing from this semi-conscious non-being to true being, which is his fully emerged consciousness. From darkness of ignorance to the light of the true knowledge. From death, that is this decay and declining process of the material conditions that we live in, where at every moment everything dies simply to survive and to take birth again, to the immortality which is the permanence of the Satchidananda, which it must manifest. So you see, in a few selections Sri Aurobindo makes, he has as if caught all the seed ideas which he then develops in the chapter which we have studied. So too in the current chapter now which we are beginning, there are 7 such quotations which we won't look at now. We will look at them at the end of the chapter. So we begin the chapter titled The Evolution of the Spiritual Man. Here Sri Aurobindo begins with a vision, a perspective. Remember, we cannot understand the true sense of evolution unless you have a big enough perspective. If you stepped into the world, let's say you're a visitor from another galaxy, you come to the earth and you see life as it is going on. How did they end up in such a mess? How will they survive? Can they at all survive? You don't have context either of past or sufficiently of the present to be able to know the future. When Sri Aurobindo is going to lead us to the recognition of what is this spiritual being that has to emerge from the mental being, you have to have a larger context, not only of the present but of the past which has brought us to where we are. So he begins with this perspective. And in this perspective, you have to go back several billion years. We are taught today by science that the universe is about 14 billion years old and our solar system is barely 4 billion years old and our earth is about the same. But maybe there's more to it. We do find entire galaxies which are much older than our galaxy even, with more complex development. So whatever has happened here may have happened elsewhere long ago. So rather than focusing on our earth, he gives you the big picture of the universe itself. In the earliest stages of evolutionary nature, we are met by the dumb secrecy of her inconscience. There is no revelation of any significance or purpose in her works, no hint of any other principles of being than that first formulation. So when you look at evolution, go back all the way as far as you can, all you find is this inconscience. Empty space or dead matter which is utterly dull and dark, not even giving off light, certainly no question of awareness or life. And in this, he says secrecy, because you can see nothing, know nothing, you don't know what is inside it, from where it has come. In this secrecy, there is no hint of what is to come also, it is dumb. And you see no other meaning or purpose to it all than this first formulation of inconscience, which is her immediate preoccupation and seems to be forever her only business. It looks as if it's like that. In fact, if you look at the way science understands our evolution today, they say if the whole of evolution could be condensed into a clock of 24 hours, human life appears barely in the last 1 minute. All the rest was just this, let's say even they will say the first 40 minutes was just this dead matter. And out of that, life and then humanity emerging is relatively short, small. So it feels as if that's all nature is obsessed with, somehow this mass of inconscient matter. For in her primal works, matter alone appears, the sole, dumb and stark cosmic reality. You could dwell on each of these words and you will see what is highlighted in each. And at this point, he makes us look at the universe as an observer. A witness of creation, if there had been one, conscious but uninstructed, would only have seen appearing out of a vast abyss of an apparent non-existence an energy, busy with the creation of matter. So let's say you are now somehow made to appear in the universe at this stage, and you're looking at the whole universe. What do you see? No life, certainly no mind. All you see is this energy, capital E. The entire universe is one gigantic energy, unconscious and busy with the creation of matter. Everywhere you see somehow matter emerging. Now there is a suggestion here which I want to touch upon. Current physics tells you matter cannot appear and disappear out of anywhere, that quantum of matter in the universe is fixed and so on. But the reality is, even if you go deep into the physics, there is constantly in the underlying substratum of empty space, there are what are called virtual particles seething, appearing and disappearing all the time. So in fact, the nature of matter itself is this constant appearance and disappearance like waves on this ocean of mechanical energy. Even in empty space, constantly matter is appearing and is being reabsorbed. And occasionally somehow it stabilizes and becomes new matter. It's the only explanation we have to describe the continuous growth everywhere in the universe. Matter seems to grow in quantity. But even if you didn't accept that, you see constantly this appearance and disappearance, busy with the creation of matter. A material world and material objects. It's continuing to build this material objects in the material world, organizing the infinity of the inconscient into the scheme of a boundless universe or a system of countless universes that stretched around him into space without any certain end or limit. Remember, you're the observer and you see all around you this happening. And again here what is fascinating is she not in any way limited by the time of science of his period. Remember, he's written this 100 years ago. And at that time, there was no conception of what the universe could be like, how big it could be, whether it is endless, or even the idea of many universes. More recently, barely in the last 30 or 40 years, you will see in popular discussion the idea that there could be multiple universes and so on. And he's including that already in his discussion. Whether it is one unending universe or a system of countless universes, it's just stretching out all around, created by this energy. A tireless creation of nebulae and star clusters and suns and planets, existing only for itself, without a sense of it, without a sense in it, empty of cause or purpose. That's all that you see in the universe. It might have seemed to him, to this observer, this witness, a stupendous machinery without a use, a mighty, meaningless movement, an aeonic spectacle without a witness, a cosmic edifice without an inhabitant. Each of these phrases he has used is actually a way of looking at the whole universe. And it's worthwhile to pause and look at each of these. It looks as if like a meaningless movement. That's all you see mechanically. It's just moving. Somehow you see appearance of matter, but it's just meaningless. Or aeonic spectacle. It's as if a drama being built up. If you stand back long enough, you will see emergence of suns, solar systems, and then the sun and solar system dying out, and others appearing and dying out. And so it seems quite pointless. But you see a spectacle which is repeating itself, the same storyline pretty much. Cosmic edifice. It's as if a whole support structure is created, but there's no one to enjoy it. What's the point of creating all this? For he would have seen no sign of an indwelling spirit, no being for whose delight it was made. So when you're looking at this universe physical only, who's enjoying it? Where is if at all there is any being? There's no sign of it. A creation of this kind could only be the outcome of an inconscient energy or an illusion cinema. A shadow play or puppet play of forms reflected on a superconscient, indifferent absolute. So straight away certain perspectives of many philosophical and even spiritual traditions are captured, that the whole thing is pointless. And the only point would be for you to get out of the illusion of it, or somehow find your absolute to get out of the suffering, or whatever, the traditions. He would have seen no evidence of a soul and no hint of mind or life in this immeasurable and interminable display of matter. It would not have seemed to him possible or imaginable that there could at all be in this desert universe, forever inanimate and insensible, an outbreak of teeming life. You're looking at this universe, there's no sign in it of anything which is what you would call life. There's only dead matter. And it is insensible, it has no sensation of any kind, it does not move by itself, it's just there. If you had come upon earth, for example, in such a phase, you would say huge mountains, valleys, maybe lots of magma and volcanoes perhaps. But then what? Perhaps you would even see beautiful rocks and beautiful colors, but what a waste, no one to enjoy it. But no sign that anyone could ever grow out of it to enjoy. You see the barren rock or the molten rock, and if someone told you out of this, one day a creature will be formed who will look at this and say it is so beautiful. What from this dead rock? It's impossible to imagine. This point he is highlighting because he shows you how at each step there is a transition which is actually miraculous, for which there is no evidence before that it could happen. And even to think that it could happen seems impossible. Why is this important? Because when we look at the transition out of the human mind into the spiritual being, it will be just as miraculous and it looks just as impossible. But then he will show you that behind that appearance of impossibility, there was always a secret process, even in matter. And that secret process is there even in your mind. And when you see that, you'll say, yes, then it is certain. But he will bring us to that slowly. So, It's unimaginable that a first vibration of something occult and incalculable, alive and conscious, a secret spiritual entity feeling its way towards the surface. None of this we can see, but it's actually there. There is a secret spiritual entity behind this whole play of dead matter. Alive, conscious, occult, that is hidden, concealed, and also incalculable. You cannot say what it will do. It can do anything it wants. But that is not seen. To imagine that that could come out later as an outbreak of teeming life is too much to believe. But in fact, you spend a little time on and look further, you see everywhere life. So he comes to this now. But after some aeons, looking once more on this vain panorama, he might have detected in one small corner at least of the universe this phenomenon of life. A corner where matter had been prepared, its operations sufficiently fixed, organized, made stable, adapted as a scene of a new development. The phenomenon of a living matter. A life in things that had emerged and become visible. Now you see what it needs. Before life can emerge, you must stabilize the activities of matter. Otherwise, the very emergence of life, at first so fragile, will be destroyed by the instability of matter. So at least in some corner of the universe, it has happened now. And what do you see? The same matter which was dead is now alive. Let's say even it is in the form of plant. It could have been even more. But the material which was soil has organized itself into tissue which is alive. And it's a miracle. But still the witness would have understood nothing. For evolutionary nature still veils her secret. What's the point of this? This is great, but he would have seen a nature concerned only with establishing this outburst of life, this new creation, but life living for itself with no significance in it. A wanton and abundant creatrix, busy scattering the seed of her new power and establishing a multitude of its forms in a beautiful and luxurious profusion. What do you see in life? Repeatedly the seeds come out, grow, die, and spread. Now you come to earth at that point. What do you see? Everywhere moss, plants, everywhere without exception. You go inside a cave, you will find moss and plants growing there. You look at the top of a mountain, you will find something. Bottom of valley, in the ocean, everywhere. From moss through plants and more complex ones. And what's their single job of this life in matter? Spreading seeds and becoming more rich, more abundant, but only for itself. What's the point again? No one to enjoy and appreciate. Or later multiplying endlessly genus and species for the pure pleasure of creation. Interesting now, there's already in the life impulse this pleasure of creating new forms and new species. A small touch of lively color and movement would have been flung into the immense cosmic desert and nothing more. So in your huge universe, endless, in one little corner you have this coloring. The witness would not have imagined that a thinking mind would appear in this minute island of life. That a consciousness could awake in the inconscient. A new and greater, subtler vibration come to the surface and betray more clearly the existence of the submerged spirit. So your witness now looking at this cannot view in the play of life that actually a thinking mind will come, and that submerged spirit which was concealed behind all this from the beginning would actually come up and start expressing thought. It's not possible. You look at the beauty of plants, you cannot imagine out of this plant someday a creature would appear that says, I'm thinking, I'm conscious, and I can actually change my design of plant or animal body. So why is he showing you these stages? Again, highlighting the impossibility of the next step, which later will become critical when we look at the step of the spirit. I'm reading very quickly because I think this passage is much more as an experience to be enjoyed. It would have seemed to him at first that life had somehow become aware of itself, and that was all. Let's say first appearance of mind. What would you say? Somehow this life, plant or animal, has become self-aware. That's all. You call it mind. No, it's just life becoming self-aware. For this scanty, newborn mind seemed to be only a servant of life, a contrivance to help life to live, a machinery for its maintenance, for attack and defense, for certain needs and vital satisfactions, for the liberation of life instinct and life impulse. So the earliest mind forms you can see are nothing but life becoming more sophisticated. You don't see it as mind proper. It could not have seemed possible to him that in this little life, so inconspicuous amid the immensities, in one sole species out of this petty multitude, a mental being would emerge. A mind serving life still, but also making life and matter its servants, using them for the fulfillment of its own ideas, will, wishes. So even at that point in the early stage of mind, you couldn't have imagined that one day the life will come up, the mind will come up, and it will seem to be a servant of life and body, but in fact it will turn the life and body as its servants and begin to mold them as it wants, as it wills, as it wishes, with all kinds of strange ideas. And the ideas which it has have nothing to do with anything around in the material world or the life. And now he describes what happens. And so as if very quickly you will see summarized the result of mind intruding upon life in the universe. A mental being who would create all manner of utensils, tools, instruments out of matter for all kinds of utilities, erect out of it cities, houses, temples, theaters, laboratories, factories. Chisel from it statues and carve cave cathedrals, invent architecture, sculpture, painting, poetry, and 100 crafts and arts. Discover the mathematics and physics of the universe and the hidden secret of its structure. Now you see how quickly all this has suddenly appeared. At least according to current science, human beings appeared as thinking human beings. We've appeared on earth barely something like 150,000 years ago, and even that was pretty crude. The more sophisticated thinking human has barely appeared 50,000 years ago, and out of that, all of this real civilizing of the mental life, at least according to science, is all in the last 5 or 10,000 years. And you see rapidly when he covers this, what did the mind do? It took matter and shaped out of it something. Tools, utensils, etc. to build with those tools cities, houses, temples, theaters. And then suddenly it becomes more and more abstract in mind. Laboratories. And then turning upon with the new science upon matter, drawing out of matter something which was not there. You look at what a mobile phone represents. In terms of pure substantiality, it is sand and a cluster of a few metals which have been refined out of mud, arranged in a particular way to give to it qualities which did not exist in nature except in some scattered random pattern. Here now organized almost as if this thing is intelligent and has its own intelligence. And with that, mass manufacture, factories. And with it also, with the mind, the sense of beauty and art. So all the sculpture, painting, poetry. And look at what happens in poetry. You are as if reaching out to realities which are impossible in the physical world and in life, glimpsing those and giving to them forms which any living creature cannot understand unless they have reached the level of high mental development. So use this image of a monkey observing a human being, human life, and say a life of a poet, or a student of poetry, or an enjoyer of good fiction. What does the monkey see? You as human being have taken a book, poetry, fiction, whatever. Maybe you're reading Harry Potter or Shakespeare. As you read it, you suddenly smile, you start laughing, and then you become sad. You start crying, you're deeply moved and affected. And so on, you go turn pages. So the monkey says, aha, that is what the human mental life looks like. I can also think. He picks up the book, turns, and starts laughing, crying, and says, see, I am also human. But what a silly thing these humans are doing. It's so much more interesting to swing from the trees. He doesn't realize he has got the book upside down because the text and the letters mean nothing. And even if you could somehow convey the words, it is unable to comprehend abstract ideas, the experience of self-sacrifice, the sense of an idealism to which you commit your whole life, knowing you will never realize it. These things belong to a realm of high thought and mental experience which is inaccessible to all these creatures. And to be able to articulate that, you do not have physical vehicles. Even words fall short. The beauty of participating in a live stage is you feel the experience of the actors before you. It's very different when you see a video, isn't it? When you meet somebody who narrates his story, the full passion of his energy and experience is literally transmitted to you, far beyond what words could convey. The same thing you read as a text of transcription, you've lost 90% of the impact of it. So what you see is you're dealing with experiences which are far beyond the domain of articulation in matter or in life forms. And this is the mental life proper of the human being. And none of this, that observer could have imagined possible. Or there was no way to describe to him, or if you told him, it would appear so silly or impossible. And so, the hidden secret of the universe's structure, live for the sake of mind and its interests. This is what it means to live for the sake of mind. This domain of experience. You go to a music concert. If you watch an animal listening to the music, take your dog, pet dog. After a while, he'll get bored. While you are having momentary bursts of ecstasies in this beautiful music, the dog listens, and although his hearing is much more sharp, its appreciation of the nuances of the music is not there because it does not have the complexity of the mind developed. And for you to dedicate your life to those values, to become a musician or to create an art, to live for an ideal and an idea, that live for the sake of mind and its interests, for thought and knowledge, develop into the thinker, the philosopher and scientist. And as a supreme defiance to the reign of matter, awaken himself to the hidden Godhead. Where is this leading? What's the highest you can go to? And at each step you have gone far beyond matter. You cannot even articulate through matter. Matter is incapable of it. And at the last stage, as if reaching the peak, awake in himself to the hidden Godhead, become the hunter after the invisible, the mystic and the spiritual seeker. Now, in terms of numbers, those who end up with this kind of a pursuit may be very small. But if you think about it, the impulse to this kind of a deeper seeking is actually there in everybody. Except that most people stop short with the first form of satisfaction. All of us, deep inside, we seek true and lasting satisfaction, which is undiluted. It should be so complete that I will say, and it should be secure. It should not be break down every now and then. It should not decay. It should not lose its joy and fullness. We all seek that. And yet as children, in eating a little piece of lollipop, we got that satisfaction. Oh yes, this is heaven on earth. And when it passed, we were not even conscious of it that it passed. We just needed the next lollipop. And then one day, eventually, as we became older, we said, what, that lollipop? Yeah, it was fun then. Now it doesn't satisfy. I need something more. So we go through the slow evolution of nature where satisfaction to greater satisfaction to greater satisfaction, each time with failure to greater failure of satisfaction. And with the biggest failures of satisfaction, we say, something is wrong. I need something more lasting. And that's when you begin to look for, is there such a thing? And can I really find it? And it takes that direction. Awaken himself to the hidden Godhead, become the hunter after the invisible, the mystic and the spiritual seeker. And again, Sri Aurobindo fast forwards the evolution. But if after several ages or cycles, the witness had looked again and seen this miracle in full process, even then, perhaps obscured by his original experience of the sole reality of matter in the universe, he would still not have understood what is this happening, because he's still seeing things from the lens of that material first perspective. It would still seem impossible to him that the hidden spirit could wholly emerge. Remember, as a human being, you're chasing after that which is hidden. Okay, you have experiences of it, but they remain subjective, hidden inside you. Can that ever come out and stand before you and say, I am here? What would that be like? Is it even possible? It would still seem impossible to him that the hidden spirit could wholly emerge, complete in its consciousness, and dwell upon the earth as the self-knower and world-knower, nature's ruler and possessor. So if this had come out fully, I know myself. I now am not only a product of nature, I reverse the balance. I own nature, I possess nature. Everything that happens in nature is my free action and will. From this awakened consciousness, complete. Impossible, he might say. All that has happened is nothing much. A little bubbling of sensitive grey stuff of brain, a queer freak in a bit of inanimate matter moving about on a small dot in the universe. That's how he would say this phenomenon is just a freak. Sri Aurobindo has a whole sonnet taking this perspective, where he describes how I forget the term, but to summarize it, it goes something like this: that a freak of brain wrote out Shakespeare's plays, and a stomach which had indigestion moved about over Europe and conquered it, and he's referring to Napoleon. And the perspective of science actually is like this, because it is so materially seated. Genius is an aberration of the brain. And this drive that is there is because of some urge of distress that Napoleon had in his stomach, which made him keep wanting to go on and challenge and conquer because of some distress of his stomach. But literally, this is how they would want to formulate bubblings of sensitive grey stuff of brain. That's all there is to it. But then Sri Aurobindo says, now change your perspective. Don't get stuck with matter. And so he gives you a new witness. On the contrary, a new witness intervening at the end of the story, informed of the past developments, but unobsessed by the deception of the beginning, might cry out. So you see, this is the new perspective you have to take. You should not start with the deception that all was matter and out of matter this has emerged. Rather, you look at what is there today as it is, and then look back at what the past stages were which brought you to where you are. So rather than looking from the past towards the future, you look at the present, look back at the past, but now turn to the future and see where this projects. Extrapolation. What will he say? Then, this was the intended miracle, the last of many, when it sees the human mind and the turn of the spirit emerging out of mind. This was the whole point of it. The spirit that was submerged in the inconscience has broken out from it and now inhabits, unveiled, the form of things which, veiled, it had created as its dwelling place and the scene of its emergence. So here when you see the spirit has come out and says, I am now master of nature, you can say, oh yes, this is the whole point of this journey. Instead of looking from the beginning, you look from the end and turn back now. The spirit has appeared. And you can say it was concealed before, it from its concealment formed all these things so that it would come out and now stand as free. But in fact, a more conscious witness might have discovered the clue at an early period of the unfolding, even in each step of its process. Now you see the clue he has given to us, and it is very simply this, that this spirit which was veiled, from its veiled condition it created as its dwelling place and scene of its emergence all these forms. So from behind the scene it created these forms so that it could inhabit, and then through it created the next form so that it might come out. But this is at the end of the story, it's obvious. But now he says a witness who's in the middle of the story can see at each step that actually this is what's happening. And now this is the perspective we have to take to understand how the next step will happen. He might have discovered the clue at an early period of the unfolding, even in each step of its process. So what are we going to see in each step? What is the clue and how is it working? This perspective will tell you how the next step will happen. So, for at each stage, nature's mute secrecy, though still there, diminishes. The secrecy which binds and hides everything, at each step the secrecy becomes less. So this is our first insight. So in the mind consciousness, the secrecy so far is the least, but in the next step, the secrecy will be entirely gone. That is, that which is concealed will now be fully freed. So secrecy diminishes at each step. A hint is given of the next step. A more overtly significant preparation is visible. So at each step you see elements of the next step preparing. Already, in what seems to be inconscience in life, the signs of sensation coming towards the surface are visible. So when life first emerges, it is inconscient life. But sensation there is already present. The moss is already responding to light. The tree is responding to humidity, to temperature, to the sun rising and setting, even phases of the moon, it seems to be able to sense. But in certain plants which are even more complex, we see what is called the Venus Flytrap. It's a plant which is almost growing like a flower, and when a fly sits on it, it senses the contact of the fly and closes up to catch the fly. There's another little plant called Touch Me Not. It's got these very fine green leaves. You touch one leaf slightly and instantly the whole plant closes up. And when it feels safe, it slowly starts emerging. And if you again touch, it goes back immediately and takes longer to open, as if it's afraid. You touch again, it closes up and takes still longer to open. It almost seems to have a sensation, and through sensation knows its world and responds almost with a kind of a emotional intelligence, but it's already there. The signs of sensation coming towards the surface are visible. In moving and breathing life, the emergence of sensitive mind is apparent. And the preparation of thinking mind is not entirely hidden. So now look at the animals where you have this moving life form and you see the complex intelligences that they express. And in their extreme, even elements of thinking mind are seen, at least in its preparatory stage. So you have today so many interesting engagements that human beings have made with apes, with domesticated other animals, dogs, horses, even dolphins. And what is fascinating is, in our interaction with them, we discover such an extraordinary intelligence, even to an extent an opening to abstract ideas, but not living in them. So a dolphin, for example, not only is shown to be intelligent, it is shown to have such love and affection, and it suffers when it is betrayed, and it even responds with a complexity of intelligence where you can see that it has this complex bonding with the human being. It does not want to hurt you and things like that. You see elephants who feel such deep sadness when the baby elephant has died. The mother will not eat food for several weeks. But that's still an emotional thing. But it corresponds to values which we consider to be human. And then we see them crafting tools. A crow actually takes a stick, and with a stick now uses it as a tool to poke things. We see in dogs a complex play where they even know how to deceive you. So if you throw a stick and the dog grabs it, you take the stick away, and there's a game of, now subtle game, where the dog will seem as if to take the stick. You approach it and it moves aside and takes another stick and says, see, I tricked you. That kind of complex behavior is almost on the borderline of conscious thinking. And when you can teach to the ape sign language, we have examples of certain apes who have learnt up to 1,000 words with sign language and can have complex conversations, in which, of course, a large part is sensory and emotional, but then it has also abstraction. And in one of those examples, the human trainer asks the ape, what does death mean for you? Death is an abstraction at that point in some way, but still. And the ape answers with sign language, it's like a black hole. You see, the sense even human beings have of what death means, unknown, into which you will kind of lose yourself because you don't know what it is. Exactly the same sense they have. And the kind of complex conversations possible show you a level of intelligence, or at least early stage of thinking mind. And now we take one more step forward. While in thinking mind, when it develops, there appear at an early stage the rudimentary strivings, and afterwards the more developed seekings of a spiritual consciousness. Wherever there is thinking mind, the rudimentary strivings of spiritual consciousness are visible, and later that becomes into a more developed seeking. And what it means for us is the example we took earlier, this deeper satisfaction, this sense of a lasting peace, the sense of a true freedom where you can be free to truly be yourself and exercise yourself, act freely without any constraint, even be free of your own constraints of capacity or knowledge, to have true knowledge which is not constantly followed with error. And something else for which we have no other word, to be truly yourself. I want to be me, but somehow I'm unable to be the true me. But what is this true me? I don't know. I don't have words for it. But I feel somewhere inside me something which is truly me, but I don't know how to describe it. So already in the mind you're seeing the next step and the signs of it. As plant life contains in itself the obscure possibility of the conscious animal, as the animal mind is astir with the movements of feeling and perception and the rudiments of conception that are the first ground for man the thinker, so man, the mental being, is sublimated by the endeavor of the evolutionary energy to develop out of him the spiritual man. Now he's putting the whole thing in perspective. The logic of it is so compelling. The evidence is so obvious that you cannot deny it anymore. In each stage, the next was there in rudimentary form. And now in the human, the mental being is sublimated by the endeavor of the evolutionary energy. The evolutionary impulse in us is working, pushing the limit of this mental being to develop out of him the spiritual man. What does that mean? The fully conscious being, man exceeding his first material self and discoverer of his true self and highest nature. So what does it mean? His first material self. What was our first material self? We'll go back to what we know human beings to be like, at least as we imagine it, in the early, crude, barbaric stage of development. That was our early stage. Today we have come out of that and we pride ourselves on being civilized, cultured. And in this, the peak of our civilization and culture, exceeding our limitations, becoming more truly ourselves, and in our nature of all the impulses which are there, to refine them to their highest gradation. So look at the food we eat, considering that that is one of the instincts which is there from the animal stages of our evolution. What have we made out of it? Gourmet food. Food which is created with nuanced tastes, subtle colorings, arrangements, flavors, made with such complex richness that it is worthy of the thinking human. Unlike the scramble which is there in the instinctive eating of the animals. We've taken out of something so crude and made of it something so refined. And in the highest, what do? We treat food as divine, or as if it's coming from the divine, sanctified by the divine, or as a source of nourishment for our deeper and higher life. At least that's the highest that we are able to take it to, even spiritualize that. And so it is with all human relationships. Where earlier they were crude, impulsive, automatic, instinctive, we have refined them to something so much higher, and even beginning to see in them a spiritual truth, that we are all conscious souls and are equally centers of divinity, equally children of the one divine, if nothing else as an idea or even a glimpse of a spiritual experience. So true self and highest nature is what we are growing towards. Now here, Sri Aurobindo has given us the perspective of the big picture of evolution. Once we have come to this acceptance, the next question is obvious. What does it mean to be this spiritual man, and how? And so he formulates this as the preparation for the real discussion of the rest of the chapter. But if this is to be accepted as the intention in nature, there are two questions that put themselves at once and call for a definitive answer. The question is asking itself to you. You didn't have to ask it. It's already there. First, the exact nature of the transition from mental to spiritual being. Now, when you say we are going to evolve into a next step, new spiritual being, what are you talking about? It's too vague. What will that spiritual being like? Will his body be made of gas? Will he be floating around as a gaseous cloud? Will he have a physical body? And if he has a physical body, can he ever overcome the limitations of the biology? Is that even possible? Now look back at the plant tissue, and if somebody told you that out of this plant tissue, eventually there would be living conscious tissue which can think, with a brain that can think, and there's nothing in the plant like a neuron or a brain to think, you'd have said impossible, isn't it? That out of that this material emerged was an impossibility. At least at that point it was impossible to see. Having emerged, you can see how all of our brain tissue is made of what? The plants that we eat. So it's actually plant transfigured into this brain tissue. So out of this brain tissue and human tissue, can a new substance emerge? What would it be like? Which would then be worthy of this spiritual consciousness, if at all it needs to have that. And what would it be like substantially? What would such a being do? What would it think? What would it act? How would it behave? This is the question which Arjuna asks Sri Krishna. You are speaking to me of this liberated being that you want me to grow into. What does a spiritually realized being look like? How does he speak? How does he act? Etc. And Sri Krishna gives him only one indication, that he will have complete equality. Complete equality. Huh? Equanimity is not the right word. Equality is the right word. Equanimity is a state of quieted emotions. Equality is when you can face every situation of life without being disturbed. Within you, nothing is disturbed. Maybe the situation is bad. It's not that everything is good or equally good. Certain things are better, some things are worse. But whatever may happen, you are able to remain unmoved internally. A knock may come, there may be pain, there may be an injury, there may be even a immediate reaction to the injury, but internally you say, yes, okay, what do I do next? And you start doing. You're not disturbed internally. Your center is equal to all circumstances. But that's not enough for us as an indication. What is a spiritual being like? It's not a human being who has attained to a spiritual consciousness. What will be the revealed spiritual consciousness? What will be its relationship with nature? Already we see in us, in the human mind, the ability to turn back on our body. Okay, so I have inherited a weak body. Can I strengthen it? And I put it through a program of exercise developed by my mind's understanding. And then I feed to it certain supplements, again from my mind's understanding. L-arginine is an amino acid which is used by the muscles for its development. I can give myself a boost of that, and then when I do my muscle stretches, my muscles grow stronger. That understanding of the working and the intervention coming from that understanding. But still, it is mind understanding using nature's process. It's not able to will into the body a change very directly. But a spiritual consciousness emerging will have a much greater power. Not only the knowledge, it won't have the dependence on L-arginine, but it will actually have a greater power to infuse in the body and literally will into it a change. Perhaps. At least we would expect that. Otherwise it would not be the revealed spirit wholly emerged. It would still be dependent on nature. It would not be self-knower, world-knower and nature's ruler and possessor. If that's the goal, then it must be able to will into its own nature whatever it wishes. So what does that mean? The exact nature of the transition from mental to spiritual being. So it's not only what the spiritual being will be like, but what the transition will be like. And this is of immediate importance for us, because we are at that stage in evolution where the transition is being prepared, nature is pushing, and we have seen the evidence for it in the previous chapter. All the signs are there that nature is pushing for a new spiritual being to emerge. And when that is given, the process and method of the evolution of the spiritual out of the mental man. What will be the process by which will happen? And what will be the method by which this will take place? Now again, some key signs he has pointed to before, that the thing which is to be next is already there as an impulse within us now. Elements which are to develop in seed form. But still, how will this process take place? And again, this becomes for us the whole point of it. If we know the process and method, we can actually consciously participate in the process, consciously apply the method and speed up the whole thing. And make the transition consciously, which is the whole point of this discussion. And the rest of the chapter it's quite a big one. I think some 30 pages or so, maybe more, 40 pages. Yes. 40 pages about, where this whole thing is covered up. And as a first step, Sri Aurobindo will prepare the ground. And in the first ground, you will see, as is his pattern, he will take up the objections. What are the things which seem to come in the way of this possibility? And then, how do you see behind that first appearance to the secret process, by which now it's obvious that these things which come in the way cannot stand in the way. And in that he will give you the insight of what's actually happening behind the scenes. Then he will take those things and bring them forward outside their concealed working into a revealed working. And then show you the mechanisms and processes. So the first question is this, in trying to understand the nature of this transition from mental to spiritual being. It would appear, it would at first sight seem evident that as each gradation emerges not only out of its precedent grade but in it. It would at first sight seem evident that as each gradation emerges not only out of its precedent grade but in it, as life emerges in matter and is largely limited and determined in its self-expression by its material conditions, as mind emerges in life in matter and is similarly limited and determined in its self-expression by life conditions and material conditions, so spirit too must emerge in a mind embodied in life in matter and must be largely limited and determined by the mental conditions in which it has its roots, as well as the life conditions, the material conditions of its existence here. So this is the first argument that could be placed to limit the possibility of the spirit emerging. Because what we see is when life first came, it was dependent on matter. Even now you will see, if you take out a plant from the soil and put it in a completely different kind of soil, very likely the plant won't survive. There are plants which grow in cold climates, they don't grow in warm climates, and vice versa. There are plants which need acidic soil, some which need alkaline soil. And then there are plants which always need soil. What we do find though, and I'm going to anticipate some of the things which come later, you can take a plant out of its environment and slightly change the environment, and each time slightly change until the plant adapts. And you see, it is still dependent on matter, but now it can live in a warmer climate and it has evolved or adapted at least, or to a more acidic soil. And what is being done today, we're actually taking plants out of soil and putting them in nutrient solutions with stone only as a support for them to mimic the feeling of soil. And you have this hydroponic gardens where there's no soil actually. The plants which needed to grow out of soil are as if hanging out of vertical structures and growing, and reasonably well. And in fact, by playing with the chemical nutrition, we can make the plants grow larger, smaller, or more hardy, more subtle. So what we see is a great adaptability, but still it has dependence on matter. Similarly, when mind appears in life in matter, it is dependent on this biology. And most obviously in us, if your sugar level drops, your mind becomes unconscious. We're so dependent on this life in the matter. And of course, for the proper working of the brain, you need certain nutritional content. You need certain quantum of life force. You need the life force to be optimistic. If it is pessimistic, if it is dull, it is depressed, your mind cannot function properly, and so on. So you see dependence always on the previous stage. And so spirit too must emerge in a mind, embodied in life, in matter, and will be determined and limited by this mind, isn't it? So it seems, first glance. It might even be maintained that if there has been any evolution of the spiritual in us, it is only as a part of the mental evolution, a special operation of man's mentality. And this is the view, in fact, among many, that spirituality is nothing but a special functioning of the mind and a subset of the mental working. In fact, even the language often expresses our core beliefs. In the French language, the word for mind and the word for spirit are identical. Esprit. Dans notre esprit. It could be translated as in our mind or in our spirit, because in fact, spirit is nothing but a refined functioning of the mind. And that's the way the culture has always looked at it. And as a result, interestingly, when they speak of spiritual life, they think of it in terms of a refined, abstract, idealized mental life. There is not in the vocabulary and therefore in the idea, in the culture, of something which is fundamentally different than mind. And this is the problem you will face when addressing these ideas in that culture. The vocabulary limits you, because that's how the mind has fixed it. But this would be an obvious perspective, a special operation of man's mentality. The spiritual element is not a distinct or separate entity and cannot have an independent emergence or a supramental future. At least that's how it would appear. The mental being can develop a spiritual interest or preoccupation and may evolve perhaps in consequence a spiritual as well as an intellectual mentality, a fine soul flower of his mental life. And this is how one would see the spirituality. The spiritual may become a predominant trend in some men, just as in others there is a predominant artistic or pragmatic trend. So you see, someone became an artist, someone became a scientist, someone became a mystic, chasing after spiritual, whatever that means. But there can be no such thing as a spiritual being taking up and transforming the mental into the spiritual nature. So this is how the logic would go. And he will, of course, neutralize this by showing you something deeper. There is no evolution of the spiritual man. There is only an evolution of a new and possibly a finer and rarer element in the mental being. This then is what has to be brought out. The clear distinction between the spiritual and the mental. Now you will see, equally in contrast to this perspective, which is very common in many of the Western cultures, in the Eastern cultures, in contrast, you'll have spiritual as disconnected from mind, representing an abstraction and a withdrawal into an absolute for which there is no continuity of mind. And so the method of reaching the spiritual is precisely turn back upon mind, break out of it, or even kill it. And then somehow you bounce out, you leap out into the spiritual. And if you're in spiritual, you cannot be in mind, and you can have no meaningful material life. Your spiritual life will be withdrawn from and cut off from. So both of these seem to be extreme in their error. So we have to understand the clear distinction between the spiritual and the mental, the nature of this evolution and the factors which make it possible and inevitable. That there should be this emergence, of the spirit in its true distinct character, not remaining as it now for the most part is in its process or seems to be in its way of appearance, a subordinate or a dominating feature of our mentality, but defining itself as a new power which will finally overtop the mental part and replace it as the leader of the life and nature. This is what we have to come to, and we have to recognize what this really means. So the idea he has put is, the spiritual, while right now it may seem to be on the crest of our mentality, it must emerge as a separate experience, a separate grade of consciousness that we begin to live in, which then can even turn upon mind and reshape the working of your mind. That's when you have come into a proper spiritual life. Not only it will reshape the mind, it will reshape the life and its instincts and drives, and perhaps even the physical body. The way mind did that to life and the body in our most developed, evolved, civilized mentality. So Sri Aurobindo now takes up this perspective, and we'll take a quick view of this and explore it in depth next time. It is quite true that to the surface view, life seems only an operation of matter, mind, an activity of life. And it might seem to follow that what we call the soul or spirit is only a power of mentality. Soul, a fine form of mind. Spirituality, a high activity of the embodied mental being. So it seems like that because of the nature of this emergence out of the previous state. that life is an operation of matter, mind is an activity of life, brain processes, brain signals, etc. So spirituality will be a fine focus, and perhaps in the brain there will be an organ which will represent your soul, or a center which is the soul experience. And there are scientists who actually believe this and think like this. In fact, even because the spirituality seems to emerge from the mind, there are many spiritual traditions even today who view the center of the soul as being in the head. So they picture the soul as a center in the middle of the head, perhaps aligned to the pineal or pituitary gland. And so when they speak of soul, they will say, concentrate here for the soul, and from here you open to the divine source. And it's interesting, while it has a valid character of experience, the deeper soul that we are, we do not experience it here, but much more in the center of the chest, behind the chakra, deeper than the chakra of the heart center. But for them to focus here is because they experience soul as a high, floating experience of the mind consciousness. But Sri Aurobindo now criticizes this view. But this is a superficial view of things due to the thoughts concentrating on the appearance and process and not looking at what lies behind the process. What's the mistake? We looked at what happened and how through a process in the brain there were signals, and so there was thought. That was the process by which we registered thought emergence. And now he's giving you first a series of examples to break this, to reverse this perspective. One might as well, on the same lines, have concluded that electricity is only a product of or operation of water and cloud matter, because it is in such a field that lightning emerges. So where do you see lightning? In a cloud, where there's humidity, there is airflow, and somehow there's a flash of lightning. So lightning is a product of cloud and water. Very simple. Wherever you see electricity, there must be cloud and water. So if you say electricity is lighting up my bulb, where's the cloud, where's the water? You see the error. You saw process by which electricity emerged, and you said electricity is now product of process. That's the error. Rather, what should we do? Because it is in such a field that lightning emerges. But a deeper inquiry has shown that both cloud and water have, on the contrary, the energy of electricity as their foundation, their constituent power or energy substance. That which seems to be a result is, in its reality, though not in its form, the origin. So in its form, it seems as if electricity emerges from cloud and water, but actually cloud and water originate from electricity. If you go deep into cloud, deep into water, you'll find electricity inherent in them. You remove that electrical part and there is no cloud, there is no water. You remove the electrons, there's no question of an atom surviving. So he has now reversed the whole priority by looking at a deeper operation. Can we say the same of our mentality? The effect is in its essence pre-existent to the apparent cause. Apparently it looks like cloud created the lightning, but actually the lightning was already pre-existent inside the cloud. The principle of the emergent activity precedent to its present field of action. What seems to emerge was actually present before its emergence. Now here's the great conclusion we will draw from this. So it is throughout evolutionary nature. Matter could not have become animate if the principle of life had not been there, constituting matter and emerging as a phenomenon of life in matter. So remember the first point he had made in the beginning of the chapter, that life emerging was like a miracle. There was nothing in matter which showed you life could emerge. So the fact that it emerged shows you that life existed independent of matter, but was concealed inside matter. In fact, matter could exist because life held it from behind. Just as electricity holds the atomic structure to make for water. And then in certain processes of water, electricity has an opportunity to reveal itself as a direct action and then go back to its concealed state. There's a flash of lightning and then it lapses back to concealment. So in matter where life was already present, which formed matter, the life was concealed, it pops up and goes back to concealment. Plant emerges, dies. Flower blooms, fades. But the life was always inside, it popped up and went back. Very important point now, which will lead to the certainty of the spiritual life. So, life in matter could not have begun to feel, perceive, think, reason if the principle of mind had not been there behind life and substance, constituting it as its field of operation and emergent in the phenomenon of a thinking life and body. So think about it, the complexity of life body, life forms, whether in plant or animal. Let's look at the human tissue. You take a single cell. It has at any given moment 10,000 different operations simultaneously ongoing, perfectly coordinated among themselves. If any one of those coordinations fail, the cell will die. It's like an entire city. And do you wish to believe that there's no intelligence involved? Can you convince yourself that this happens mechanically without intelligence? What you can say is, if there was not intelligence in the cells working, cell could not be. And if there was intelligence in the cellular working, it is also intelligence in the organic working of the clusters of cells. See the complexity of coordination between the different organs in a simple process of digestion. It must take what it wants, not take what it doesn't want. It must not take in excess. It must maintain balance. It must break down and digest, release digestive juices according to the kind of food there is, and it must carefully ensure the excretion of all the waste. And all of this is coordinated in a complex operation across organs where the brain is not obviously seen to be operative. You're not conscious that this is happening, that is happening. It's an automatic intelligence, but so perfect that if you interfere with it, it messes it up. But after being messed up, it adapts to your messed up condition and circumvents your intervention. So intelligent. It is an adaptive, learning, operating intelligence which knows how to do what it wants in spite of interference. And so if that intelligence is there in your life and biology process, its emergence into an active, revealed intelligence is not a surprise, but even you would say it's inevitable that it should be able to do that at some point when the biology life base is complex enough to be able to express it. When it's not complex enough, it is still operating but not expressed as an overt intelligence, but working as a covert intelligence sustaining the life. So again, the logic here is obvious. So too, spirituality emerging in mind is the sign of a power which itself has founded and constituted life, mind and body, and is now emerging as a spiritual being in a living and thinking body. Now think of the implication of this and go back to the previous chapter and the quotations we read from the Veda. If there was not a conscious being within which is leading the whole journey of evolution, we could not have come to where we are. Our mind would not be constantly trying to exceed limitations, to overcome challenges, to always grow towards the more beautiful, the more true, the more satisfying, etc. That has to be there as an impulse, although initially concealed. And if it is there concealed, it must eventually come forward, where the surface personality has been sufficiently refined out of its animal instincts, where mind has become sufficiently able to hold this experience of something deeper and truer, it will start leaking out and organizing itself. Now emerging as a spiritual being in a living and thinking body. How far this emergence will go, whether it will become dominant and transform its instrument is a subsequent question. But what is necessary first to posit is the existence of spirit as something else than mind and greater than mind. Spirituality as something other than mentality, and the spiritual being therefore as something distinct from the mental being. So this is the conclusion we come to. Just as we have a physical being, we have a vital body, we have a mental body, there is actually a spiritual body which is made of its own substance, which is its own independent being. Spirit is a final evolutionary emergence because it is the original involutionary element and factor. So the question could be asked, after spirit, is there another being? And this is final because that was the origin of all this. In it, the whole thing is already revealed. From there, the concealment started, and into it, the revelation completes. Evolution is an inverse action of the involution. What is an ultimate and last derivation in the involution is the first to appear in evolution. So there was spirit, it reduced itself into intelligent mental consciousness, reducing itself to impulsive life force, which then reduced itself to dull, dead seeming materiality, into which now all those things were now concealed. Out of these emerging, so what was the last term of involution is the first term of evolution. What was original and primal in the involution is in the evolution the last and supreme emergence. Now, having come to this point, you see how Sri Aurobindo started with what seemed at first that every emergent step depended on the previous stage and was bound to it. Now we have completely reversed the perspective. Every emergent state is actually more free and originates the previous stage from which it has emerged and has a greater power to change it. But the power of life over matter is, although greater, is limited and cannot completely change matter because the origin of matter is not life. When mind emerges out of life, similarly, there's a limited power. But when you reach spirit, which is the origin of it all, it has complete, total power, which would make possible this mastery over nature. So go back to the previous couple of pages where he says, the spirit wholly emerging, complete in its consciousness, dwelling upon the earth as the self-knower and world-knower, nature's ruler and possessor. This is possible. This is also inevitable. Why inevitable? Because it was the origin, and if it has concealed itself, it has to be able to emerge fully, because it was the source of the whole concealment itself. And so nothing can prevent it. At this point, we are at a level of conviction, which is very important for us to integrate in our consciousness. Our view of the world now needs to be recast on this basis. We have been brought up in our education to think of mind as product of our body. It's also perhaps our habit to think body limits us, or even that our emotions, we are slave to our emotions and instincts, or that our mind has only a limited capacity. This is a falsehood. There is already within us that spirit which we seek to go awaken to or to grow into. It is already there, and from its concealed poise behind the veil, it is fully conscious. It is exercising an influence at each step to guide the mind. If now we turn to seek its help, if now we make the means possible for its direct emergence, rather than offering instinctive opposition, we make a conscious receptive base, its emergence can be much more rapid, and with its emergence it can take charge and quickly recast, reshape all these things. So in fact, the next step in evolution should become enormously easier than any of the previous stages of evolution. Not only it is certain, it is also easier. And the thing which we are seeking is actually there to help us. We couldn't have said this of previous stages of evolution because the things which were there were intermediate powers. Life in matter was bound and had to fight and struggle. But spirit is not bound. Inherently being the source, it can overcome. But if it emerges too rapidly, perhaps it could destabilize. And so in its own wisdom, it may choose a gradual passage of emergence. But if you created the conditions where it could emerge rapidly without destabilizing, then it will choose to do that more rapidly, isn't it? Because that is its object. The fact that you work to create those conditions is because you already feel the truth of spirit, or spirit is already influencing your mind to say, this is what I want. So in a sense, from its concealed poise, it works to form the base for its rapid emergence. And when you dwell on this, imprint these ideas, allow this to become the conviction, you realize that the spiritual life, the spiritual being emerging is well within reach, is in fact our purpose in this very lifetime, and not something to happen over many lives. And perhaps even for those of us who are studying this, it means we are in fact ready for this, that our life is meant for this. Otherwise we would not find this interesting. It would be merely speculation or philosophy. But if this is for us a living truth, it means this is what we are intended for in this lifetime. So the power of Sri Aurobindo's formulation, where he takes up all these contrary positions and then gives you the deeper and higher perspective, is precisely to overcome all those layers of doubt or questioning and awaken in us the certainty, but also integrating the certainty across all these levels of our own mentality and experience, until the whole of our being is as if aligned around this single one idea with full conviction. And that's one of the requirements for the emergence of the spirit more and more directly, the full alignment of our individual being towards that. So we will continue this passage next time, next Friday, and he will begin to make the distinctions, nuances of distinctions between the mental and the spiritual, which is extremely important. And in the very fact of distinguishing them, he will show you how the spiritual is already hidden inside the mental. And so you will see in your own thinking, in your own mind processes and ideals, the spiritual secretly guiding, and when you become conscious of it, you will be able to align yourself to those things and even consciously amplify those tendencies within you. So it's a fascinating chapter, very profound, but much more life-changing, because it changes your whole perspective of reality and of yourself. We'll continue this next Friday. We can meditate on it for a few minutes to settle this vision and make this a living experience of our aspiration.